What is up, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about slicing and some more advanced list functions. So in the last video we actually learned about how to actually access elements in a list, update them, delete them, or add new ones, right? But let's say we had the last list from the last lesson. So let's say bread, milk, and bananas. Oops, can't type. Okay, and then potatoes, can't forget potatoes. Okay, so now we learned about how to actually access each individual element, update or delete. But let's say we wanted to actually access not just one element, we actually wanted to get back maybe these two elements, or these two elements, or these three elements. So how do you actually do that in Python? I mean, one alternative is to actually keep accessing each one individually, right? And maybe put them in a list. But let's look at an easier way with slicing. So let's define a list, call it sublist, right? And sublist is basically just a smaller list inside of this list, right? Just a variable name. I'm just calling it sublist. And then I actually want to call a reference this shopping list, right? And so how do you actually access or get access to multiple elements in a list? So in the last video we did like something like 1, which gave us like milk, right? And then maybe 2 gave us bananas, right? So let's say I wanted to get from milk to bananas, I wanted to get these two elements, right? So how do you do that? Well, there's something called slicing. And so you would actually start with saying which index or which element are you starting at? So I'm actually going to start at milk. I want to get the elements starting from milk and including bananas. So milk and bananas, I want to get these two elements. So I'm starting at this element, which is actually at index 0, 1. So it's at index 1. So I would start with 1, and then I would put a colon. And so after this colon, I'm actually going to specify which element I'm going to stop at and not include. So I've already mentioned I want milk, right, which starts at 1, and then I want bananas, right, which is technically index 2. And then I want to stop at potatoes. I don't want to actually include potatoes, but I want to stop at potatoes. And this is the element, this is the index which you actually put here. So I'm going to put 3 because this is index 3, because 0, 1, 2, 3. So essentially what I've said is, hey, I want you actually to get a sublist, or basically, you know, a list within this list, and it's going to start from the element at index 1, which is milk, and it's going to keep going, right, up until you reach the element at index 3. So I'm starting at 1, keep going, get this element at 2. Once I hit 3, I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm not going to actually include 3, but I'm stopping at 3. So 3 is actually not included, right? It's actually excluded, but that's where you're stopping. So I'm actually going to get milk and bananas. So if you actually print this value, let's see what we actually get. So when you run this, notice we actually get milk and bananas. We get a list of milk and bananas, right? So you might say, well, okay, this gave me a list. What if I wanted to get the values, right? Well, you have to actually get a sublist, right, as a list, and then you can actually directly treat this as another list. So let's say I can say I want to get, let's say milk. Either I can do milk and get it from here, shopping list, or I can get it from the new sublist that I defined, right? The sublist here, this is basically returning another list, just a smaller list, right? So sublist, I'm going to get, so milk is at index 0, as you can see here. So I'm actually going to pick 0. And when you print milk, you get milk, right? Now you actually have the value and not a list, right? So that's actually how you can basically use slicing to get more than one element in a list, right? And slicing can be used not just for accessing elements, you can actually change multiple elements. So let's say I want to change milk and bananas, right? So from the last video, what I could do is I could just say, okay, shopping list, so I want to change milk, which is at index 1, I want to set it to, I don't know, juice, and then I want to actually, you know, change bananas to, I don't know, so it's index 2, right, because 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, I want to change it to, let's say, apples, right? So you can do this, that's fine, but there's actually a shortcut. There's an easier way, right? Let's say you wanted to change like 20 different elements. You're going to keep, you know, specifying the index and whatnot. So there's an easier way of changing multiple elements that actually are so elements that are actually consecutive, right? So how you can do that is, again, with slicing. So what I would do is I would say shopping list, right? Again, open the square brackets, and then it's the same idea. which elements do I want to start from that I actually want to change? Well, I want to start from, let's change it up a bit. Let's say I want to change bananas and potatoes. So bananas is 0, 1, 2 at index 2. So I want to change or access the elements starting from index 2, which is bananas. So I'm going to actually put 2, colon, and then I want to continue until I hit the element that I want to stop at. So in this case, actually, I want to change bananas and potatoes. So then you might say, well, do I put 3 then? Do I do this? Well, no, because if you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to access bananas, and then once you hit 3, you're going to stop. So you're actually going to stop here and not include potatoes. So what you have to do in this case, even if there's no other element at index 4, that's fine, because you're not actually trying to access the element after potatoes. You're not trying to do that, right? Potatoes is at index 3, but you're saying, I want you to stop at index 4. So basically what you're saying is, I want you to actually get bananas and potatoes and stop before you hit index 4. Even though index 4 is not here, that's fine. It's not going to throw an error because you're not actually trying to access. Rather, you're saying stop at index 4. So let's actually first try printing this to show you that it actually doesn't throw any errors and it works fine. And notice we get bananas and potatoes. So now let's actually change these values. So same thing, right? We can access these values just like we did, but we can actually change the values, right? So I'm going to say equals another list, and I'm actually going to say, let's say juice, and I'm going to say, what else? What's other than potatoes? I don't know, carrots, right? So what's going to, oops, I got to make this a string, right? This has to be a valid data type. So when I do this, notice what, oh, I have to print this out to show you guys, but shopping list. So now the new value, let's print it out before and after. So the initial value is this, right? And then once we run this, once we actually change the values of the elements starting from index 2, which is bananas, up and stopping at index 4. So I go 2, 2, 3, and then I stop at index 4 before I hit index 4. And so the values 2 and 3 are actually changed to juice and carrots, as you can see here, right? So now we actually know how to change elements using slicing. Now, what if we wanted to actually delete elements, right? So in the last video, we talked about simple deletions accessing one index, right? So let's say I wanted to delete bananas. I would do something like, shopping list. Let's just remove this. Shopping list 2. Oops. Delete, right? So now when I run this, it's going to delete bananas, right? So let's say I wanted to delete bananas and potatoes, right? So again, I can use the same slicing technique. I can say 2 to 4. So I'm starting from 0, 1, 2, starting from this element. I'm continuing till 3, and then once I hit 4, right? So once I do 2, 3, and then that's it. 2 and 3 are going to be deleted now. I'm stopping before I hit 4. So when I run this, notice what happens. I've actually deleted bananas and potatoes, right? So that's how you can use deleting. That's how you can use slicing to delete consecutive elements in a list. And so we can actually also talk about other functions when you want to add stuff, right? So we actually talked about simple append function, right? We talked about how you can append an element to this list and add it to the end just by using this function shopping.list.append and then the element that you want to append, right? For instance. So how can you actually add an element but not at the end? Let's say you want to add it here. And I don't want to change these values. I want to keep those the same. I want to keep all of the same, but I just want to add it in between. So you can use another function called insert. And so insert, you would actually specify the index and then the actual thing you want to insert. So I actually want to insert after bread. And since bread is at index 0, then the next element is going to be at index 1. So I'm saying I want to insert this new value at index 1. And I want the value to be, let's say, chips, right? So what's going to happen now is when I run this, after inserting, I'm basically inserting chips at index 1. So 0 and then 1. So I'm replacing index 1 from being milk to chips. I'm still keeping milk as it is, as you can see here, but I'm replacing the element index 1 with chips now, right? So I'm adding it, I'm inserting it in between, right? And then there's actually another way. Let's say you wanted to add multiple elements to the end, right? So you can actually do this. You can keep saying shopping list.append, and then you can keep calling this multiple times, shopping list.append, right? But then this is kind of repetitive, and let's say you want to add like 100 elements, right? So there's an easy way of doing this. It's called shopping list.extend. So you're extending this list by adding another list to it. So let's say I want to add more shopping items like I don't know, butter, eggs, jam, right? So now what happens is I'm actually adding this list onto this list. So as you can see here, now I have all these extra elements, right? And so that's how you can actually extend the list. So now we actually talked about, changing with slicing. We actually talked about adding new elements in between, not just at the end, and actually extending with multiple elements. We actually talked about deleting using slicing. And so we pretty much covered a lot of the basic stuff. But like I said at the beginning of the video, there's actually a lot of functions, right? There's a lot of things that come with lists, right? So there's even another way that you actually remove elements. You can remove elements by using another function called remove. So remove, basically, and you type in the actual value, let's say milk. Now I don't have to actually remove an element by its index. I can actually specify the value and it's going to remove it. So when I run this, notice what happens. It says, okay, you want to remove an element with a value of milk. I'm going to check all these elements. I'm going to check for a value of milk and I'm going to remove it, right? And there's even more functions, right? So there's a lot of functions when it comes to list, and it's fine, guys. You don't have to memorize all these functions. That's not how programmers work or think. It's very common for programmers to keep looking up things that they've used before, and once you use them more often, you'll be more familiar and remember them. So we've talked about a lot of the basic and the very fundamental use cases and usages of lists and what you can do with them. And so if you guys still are interested in more functions, you can look through the documentation. I'll actually link a very basic link that pretty much talks about everything I've mentioned, and hopefully you guys have a great understanding of lists now. Make sure to stay tuned, like, and subscribe.